So welcome to our webinar about financial counseling for people living on low incomes. We're so happy you were able to join us today. We were delighted to see that over 300 people signed up for this webinar. So apologies again for making you wait, and we'll get started right away. My name is Elodie Young, and I'm the Program Manager at Prosper Canada. For those of you who don't know me, who don't know Prosper Canada, we are a national charity dedicated to expanding economic opportunity for Canadians living in poverty through program and policy innovation. We will tell you a little bit more about our organization in a minute, but before that, I just want to give you an overview of our webinar. So we will start with a quick introduction. Then Liz, our CEO, Liz Mulholland, will tell you more about who we are and what we do. Then we'll get right into a scan of our financial counseling best practices. That will include the context, objectives, and methods, as well as some of our key findings and our conclusions. And then I will talk about where we go from here. So what is some of the work that Prosper Canada has started to do in this area? And we will have a questions and answers period where both Liz and myself will be available, as well as one of our colleagues, Anna Fremont, who has over 8 years of experience in financial counseling programs, and she'll be able to answer your questions as well. This webinar will be recorded and we'll be posting it on our website afterwards, and it will be an hour long. So a few technical updates. Everybody on this webinar has been put on mute, but please share any questions that you have using the question box, which is located at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. And feel free to do that throughout the presentation, and then we'll answer as many questions as we can towards the end of the webinar. So as I mentioned, our speaker today will be our CEO, Liz Mulholland. She joined Prosper Canada in 2011 after 11 years as a Prosper Canada board volunteer and an independent policy consultant. Liz also has quite a lot of impressive experience. So she was the senior advisor of the Office of the Prime Minister and focused on national social and health policy issues. And she led United Ways of Ontario's Government Relations Program. She also served as an advisor to the Task Force on the Future of the Greater Toronto Area and was a political assistant to 2 Ontario Cabinet ministers. So I will now pass it on to Liz, who will go over the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to share the results of our best practices scan with you this morning. So before we get into the study itself, just wanted to talk a little bit about Prosper Canada, who we are, and our work in the area of financial empowerment. Essentially, as Elodie mentioned, our mission is really expanding economic opportunity for Canadians that live in poverty, but through program and policy innovation. So we're not a direct service organization. As Canada's leading champion of financial empowerment, our job is to work with governments, businesses, and community partners across the country to really develop and promote financial policies, programs, and resources that can transform the lives of low-income Canadians, and in doing that also foster the prosperity of Canadians more generally. And the way that we work is because we're very focused, like many of you, on how to reach as many people as possible and to do that in a sustainable way. These are the perennial challenges we all face. We've put a lot of emphasis on really identifying service systems and organizations that already have a lot of reach into low-income populations across Canada or in their region, and then working with them to find ways to build proven financial empowerment approaches into their businesses in ways that are sustainable for them, help them achieve their goals as organizations or institutions, and at the same time really measurably increase the financial well-being of the low-income people that they're working with. In terms of, when we talk about financial empowerment, I realize it's not a term that's familiar to everybody. What we're really talking about is creating a Canada in which all financially vulnerable Canadians have access to the financial programs, services, products, and advice that they need to build their financial well-being. And more specifically, when we get down to a practical level, what we're really talking about is creating communities in which all Canadians have access to good quality, neutral, accessible financial information, education, and counseling that really meets their needs and improves their financial outcomes. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. But also to look at how we can make sure there's supports in place to help people who are low income access benefits and tax credits that can quickly boost their income. Also making sure that they have access to safe and affordable financial products and services that really meet their needs. And we know that many mainstream products and services don't meet the needs of Canadians living on low incomes adequately. And also connecting people to savings and asset building opportunities that enable them to build their wealth over time and also to secure a decent and dignified retirement for them. And finally, we look at consumer protection. So this isn't all about helping individuals to make changes in their lives or just putting community sorts in place, but also making sure that we have a level playing field and that appropriate consumer protection policies and regulation are in place to reduce financial risk for Canadians and also help them to avoid financial vulnerability. So why do we focus on financial empowerment? The reason is that financial vulnerability has really risen significantly over the past decade in Canada, but we really don't have comprehensive strategies in place to build the financial resilience of households or communities. And when we talk about financial vulnerability, we really mean that we're talking about families or individuals that have low, no, or negative net worth at all. So when you tally up the sum total of their savings and assets against their debts and liabilities, these are people who come out with zero or negative wealth. And so these are people who are really vulnerable to any dip in their income or any increase in their expenses can really push them into poverty if they're not in poverty already. And the reason we care about this is really that Canadians have now have the highest debt-to-income ratio in the G7. Thank you. And right now in Canada, the average household debt is at 163%, or over actually, of average annual income. So that means Canadians have 160% of their income in debt on average. Nearly 1 in 6 Canadian families have a net worth of 0 or less. And nearly 1 in 4 Canadians have no financial wealth at all. So no savings, no stocks, no bonds, no RRSPs, nothing in the bank. And finally, Canada's household savings rate, which used to be very good at 20% of average annual income, has reached a historic low at 3.6%. So in the greater scheme of things, when we look at household balance sheets, we're not doing very well in Canada, and people at the low end of the income spectrum are really most at risk in this scenario. So this brings us to our study of best practices in financial counseling. So the reason we undertook this study was because through our activities through our Prosper Canada Centre for Financial Literacy and our network of community-based organizations that are providing financial education support to Canadians on low income, and also through our TD Financial Literacy Grant Fund, where we provide funding to organizations that are doing this work, we've noted a growing demand among Canadians with low incomes for personalized financial support. At the same time, we've seen a growing number of grassroots organizations in Canada have begun experimenting with different individual financial counseling approaches. So not just doing financial literacy workshops, but working with people on low incomes one-on-one to help them strengthen their financial situation and build their financial security. At the same time, we also know that in Australia, the UK, and the US, governments have actually put in place large-scale programs to provide one-on-one financial counseling support to people with low incomes, and that there's a lot that we can learn from these programs. So we thought this would be an opportune time to take a look at what do we know about good practices in this area. So in terms of the study itself, we really had 3 main goals. The first one was to identify practitioner and expert perceptions of best practice. So practitioners being people who had 3 or more years of experience in the field delivering financial counseling to low-income people, and experts being academics who are specialized in the evaluation of financial counseling programs, but also people working in networks or associations that support the field of community financial counseling for low-income people. The second objective was really to explore the extent to which these perceptions of best practice are drawn primarily from practitioner experience and insights, or indirectly from looking across what practitioners are doing in the evaluation results, or more from research evidence, so peer-reviewed research evidence, or a combination of both. So really, what evidence base underpins these perceptions, these perceived best practices? And third, what we really want to do is identify whether there are areas of consensus and possibly real divergence in perceptions that really require us to look at them further. So our goal was really to map key themes and insights, and then with the idea that we would then use that to do more in-depth research to validate the best practices that were identified in this study. So in terms of the methodology, we undertook the study in 2013, and we commissioned Janet Murray, and many of you will know Janet as a leading evaluation expert in our field, and her firm, Resources for Results, which specializes in research and evaluation. And Janet undertook 10 exploratory interviews with practitioners and academics who had a lot of expertise in the field of financial counseling for low and modest income people. She used those exploratory interviews to build out the list of key informants from the different jurisdictions we want to look at that would form the basis of the study. In total, 19, actually, it says 20, I apologize on the slide. It was 19 structured one-hour key informant interviews were conducted with a cross-section of financial counseling practitioners, academic experts in this area, and people working in networks or associations that are focused on supporting this work. The bulk of the interviews, however, were conducted with frontline practitioners. And as you can see, these interviews were conducted with key informants from Australia, Canada, the UK, and the US. The bulk of the interviews were conducted with key informants from Canada and the US, with a smaller sample from Australia and the UK. And one interview was conducted in French in Quebec as part of that, with support from Entraide Budgétaire, so thank you very much. And really we asked key informants a number of questions. One was to identify the best practices in relation to program design, program delivery, and program management, and in that to actually tell us what are the three most important best practices that they wish to communicate to other people in the field. We then invited them to share further learning and advice from their experience, and also then to tell us whether the best practices they were highlighting to us were drawn from their experience, from research evidence, or both. So in terms of the findings, really the best practices that were identified fell under four main themes. So I'm going to proceed through each theme individually and then talk about the top most highly cited best practices that people really thought we should emphasize, and also some other findings that emerged, observations from the feedback that we got during the study. So theme one was really emphasizing the importance of creating a foundation for behavior change in clients. And three key best practices were identified in this area. The first one was really making sure that you align the objectives, your delivery approach, and the target population with the mission of your organization. And this was very important both in terms of making sure that you were designing your program in a way that met the needs of your clients, but also that by aligning it fully with your mission, that it would be sustainable and something the organization could invest appropriately in and commit to over the long term. The second best practice was really emphasizing the importance of developing a theory of change to identify client target outcomes that would guide program delivery and further research. Having a clear focus on outcomes was very important, and there were differences in jurisdictions in terms of the focus here and to what degree people were measuring outcomes, which brings us to our third point, which was really the importance of using formal performance benchmarking and metrics, both to structure the actual counseling process and to document what the steps that were being taken with clients and to measure the impact and outcomes at the end of it. And really, I think in the U.S., there was a very strong commitment to that, and it was starting to emerge in Canada as well. The second theme was really about the importance of tailoring programs to client populations. And anybody who's at the front line serving clients knows the importance of tailoring and adapting your approaches to meet your clients where they are. So I don't think this best practice is a shock to anybody, but in the case of financial counseling, it really was, it raises a lot of complex questions. And the first thing that we noted was that people were using different terminology around financial counseling. Some people were using the terms financial coaching, some using counseling, and some were using them interchangeably, but other key informants really felt strongly about the use of one term or another. And then when we began to unpack that and explore in depth the reasons for that, we realized there were actually a spectrum of counseling approaches that were being used that ranged from counseling on the left of the spectrum, as you see in the diagram here, to coaching on the right. And really, it depended on what the nature of the clients were and what their financial needs and priorities were, played a big role in determining which methods one used. And to just distinguish in a very simplistic way, counseling is really tended to be a shorter-term approach focused on immediate crisis and problem solving, and where the counselor played a more directive expert role in providing direct advice to the clients. It was less focused on building their longer-term financial capability or longer-term planning and action plans, more around helping them with immediate needs. And it really turned out that counseling was being used for clients who were in survival or crisis mode, so people who had immediate urgent needs, problems that needed to be solved, and that this proved to be the right approach for them. However, practitioners told us that as clients stabilized financially and then began to, so these would be people who have a job, they have a regular income, it might go up and down a bit, but these are people who aren't dealing with any immediate crisis or emergency, then they could start moving into a more future-oriented mode with them, which really started to take clients through a process of saying, what are your longer-term goals, life goals? What types of financial goals do you want to set in relationship to those? And how can we build a longer-term action plan that will help you move toward that and build your financial capabilities? So not a counselor providing you with answers and telling you how to solve your problem, but helping build your financial capabilities so that you can yourself solve problems and move yourself forward along this plan. And so that really is the quintessence of what the coaching relationship is. So really the best practices that emerge from this were it's really important to understand where your clients fall on the financial needs continuum along that spectrum from survival mode to future mode, and then design your financial counseling intervention to address their specific needs and priorities. And the reality was many practitioners told us that they use a blended approach depending on the needs of the particular clients, although some really did fall more at one end of the spectrum than the other. The main thing was to ensure that a range of specialized financial supports is available to clients and that the people who are delivering these supports, whether it's coaching or counseling, really have the requisite training and skills to do a really effective job. The third theme was really about adopting client-centered practices. And again, I don't think this is news to many of the practitioners in the audience, but what was interesting is how this was articulated in the form of quite a long list of best practices here. So the first one was ensuring programs are unbiased, high quality, accessible, and empowering. And here really it was the importance of providing people with neutral financial support and advice that was not tied to the sale of any product or service, and that was good quality by people who are trained to work with people on low incomes around their financial challenges, and that was accessible, so we're not charging people money for this service. It's free, it's accessible, it's delivered in places that people can easily access, and in language and in a manner that is accessible to people and not intimidating in the way that they might find financial supports delivered by a mainstream institution, and that it's empowering. It's helping to build their capability over time. The second practice was really ensuring that counselors possess the knowledge, attributes, and skills to work effectively with vulnerable clients who live on low incomes. So this is both the content knowledge around financial matters, the coaching skills and counseling skills that they need, and also an empathetic attitude so they can meet clients where they were, focus on their goals and aspirations and priorities, and really orient around supporting them to address those. The third best practice was really combining counseling and coaching techniques as needed to meet the needs of clients, but also funders. So some funders really did need to show tangible changes in financial outcomes for people. So that really did actually shape the interventions that were delivered in some cases by practitioners. It's a reality I think we all work with when we're dependent on other organizations to fund our work. So it really is trying to find the right balance between designing a program to meet the needs of the client and the funder's objectives as well. The fourth key practice was really about keeping clients engaged. So particularly for financial counseling, which is actually a longer-term relationship that goes anywhere from 3 to 12 months, it's really important to find a way to keep the person engaged in the relationship. So longer-term goal setting was seen as a key way of doing that, and also reconnecting with clients at tax time, which is a great opportunity to help boost people's incomes, to talk to them about setting up emergency savings funds, etc. So it's always a good time to connect with people. Fifth best practice was treating people with low incomes as competent individuals with their own priorities and goals. And even though I think the counseling relationship was more about, I'm sorry, I made a mistake earlier. I said counseling was 3 to 12 months. I meant coaching. Apologize for that. Even though the counseling may be more oriented around short-term problem-solving stuff, it really is important to orient around the goals and priorities of the clients, and to treat them as competent people. So even if there is some advice giving in a counseling relationship in the short term, the goal is to move people towards building their financial capability and empowering them, and really building their sense of agency and efficacy and their own ability to advocate for themselves financially. The sixth best practice is adapting the content, tools, and products to serve consumers with low incomes. And again, many mainstream financial products, supports, approaches actually are not well adapted to the needs of people with low income. So it's really making sure that we're not using off-the-shelf product, but really designing for the clients. And 7 is using technology to support clients and counselors to achieve better outcomes. And this can be everything from using financial calculators, financial information tools, but also client management systems that actually support and guide counselors and coaches in their work, as well as collecting data and providing the clients with information. Oops, sorry. So the fourth theme is helping to build a viable financial counseling field. So this is a very, our slide is not moving on the, sorry, we're having a technical difficulty. We've changed the slide at our end, but it hasn't changed at your end. So we'll just hold for one moment while we try to sort that out. Oh, there we go. Okay, problem solved. So the fourth one was really helping to build a viable financial counseling field. And this, everybody was very cognizant that in North America, at least, this is a new field. It's emergent. We're all learning how to do this well. So I think most organizations really felt the need to not just deliver a good program, but to actually contribute to building the field and become part of something larger if we want this field to be sustainable and to grow in our jurisdiction. So one thing they talked about was in the management of their programs to anticipate, plan for, and manage risk. So at the very first instance, if we want a viable field, organizations have to actually take risk management around the delivery of this program seriously to avoid unfortunate incidences or failures that then make it more difficult to attract funders to this work later on. The second best practice was around really establishing practitioner networks and helping to increase formalization of the field. So, a study like this is one way to help start that forward, but communities of practice, sharing evaluation results, formalized knowledge exchange, and sharing impacts and outcomes so that folks can use these to make the case to funders for investment in this area are all ways we can do that. Third was building capacity in diverse systems to integrate financial counseling into the programs and services with people with low income. So in the United States, the push towards putting financial counseling services in place has been led by cities. And what's been very interesting is that they've actually been integrating financial counseling into municipal government social services. So services they deliver themselves as well as those they fund community organizations to do. And that's seen as a sustainable way to help improve the scale and the reach of these programs. 4 is evaluating programs systematically, and we all know about the importance of this. And 5 is really collaborating and promoting specialization to strengthen policy work. So we're starting to see in different jurisdictions these kind of associations or networks that are taking on the role of kind of backbone organizations to help support this work and to generate the knowledge, do knowledge exchange work, and also to help inform and shape government policy around this. Oops. So we're having another slide delay difficulty. So I'll just start in on this, and then the slide will catch up. So in terms of the most recommended best practices, 5 came out on top. We asked people to identify 3. The 5 really were the winners. The first one that everybody agreed on was invest in systematic performance and outcome measurement. So really focus on measuring the tangible outcomes of the financial counseling process or coaching and make sure that's communicated to funders. Second one was aligning the objectives, delivery, and target populations to the organizational mission, which we already discussed. The third is kind of a mashup, I'd say, of a number of the best practices we discussed, which is really about adopting a strengths-based, non-judgmental, non-directive approach to really enable low-income clients to achieve their own financial goals over time. And finally, 4 is develop a theory of change that shows how your program will promote longer-term behavior change. So that really is the goal that people are agreed on. And 5 is really collaborate and promote specialization. Oh, sorry, no, it's not. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong slide. 5 is providing appropriate training and support to staff and volunteers. So really investing in the skills and knowledge of your people is very important. Okay, so in conclusions overall, and I apologize, oh, here we go, it's working again. What we learned is there is actually a high degree of consensus on best practice from the key informants that we spoke to. With respect to how evidence-based these are, practitioner perspectives really were drawn primarily from practice, but there is a shift underway in the field to more formal performance and outcome measurement. That we think will generate more evidence down the road that we can start to pay closer attention to. At the same time, there isn't very much formal behavioral research on financial counseling practice, but this is behavioral economics is something that actually has had a strong influence on people's thinking in the field. And there is actually a huge degree of confidence in the field that financial counseling will grow as a field despite funding challenges because of the really strong outcomes it's generating and its potential to influence other social and economic outcomes for low-income people. So really what we're hoping will be a next follow-on step, and we don't have money to do this yet, but maybe somebody else will do it or we will do it down the road. But really the next step is really to review the peer-reviewed and grade literature to, against these best practices we've identified, to validate them and see if there are any others that we're missing. Okay, well, I will now turn it over to Elodie. Thank you very much, and she'll talk about where we go from here.
Great, thank you, Liz. So I'll really quickly tell you a little bit about what we're going to do, what we're going to be doing at Prosper Canada. So the first area of work is we're going to test different financial counseling and coaching approaches in diverse contexts. And we've got a few projects currently underway that we're very excited about. One is we're partnering with Toronto Employment Centres here in the city and connecting clients that they serve, which could be people on social assistance or people that just lost their job and are starting to look for a job, and connecting them with financial advisors who are professional financial advisors as volunteer financial coaches that we'll be training. So this is one of the projects we're going to be doing. Another one is we're also partnering with Jewish Family and Child Services as well in Toronto, and West Neighborhood House, who has a really fantastic program, the Financial Advocacy and Problem Solving. And again, we're going to be providing financial coaching there. And finally, we're partnering with Calgary's Financial Futures Collaborative. And so we're going to be doing some training and capacity building in Calgary to a few stakeholders over there as well, including United Way Calgary, Momentum, Bow Valley College, I believe, and potentially a few others. Another piece that we are interested in doing is to building and sharing a financial counseling coaching toolkit over the next couple of years. So this is something we're currently starting to build, and the hope is that it will not only support for our current projects, but it will be provided widely and available to other organizations who would like to access it. Like always, we'll be supporting community organizations to roll out and test financial counseling and coaching. So this is kind of a lot of what we do is we try to support community organizations as much as we can. And for this, financial counseling and coaching, this is something we'd be interested in continuing to do as well. And finally, we want to keep practitioners up to date on what we are up to and what is happening in the field. And so that's also something we'll be doing, and you'll be seeing more information and communication from us telling you a little bit about what's going on here. So now that we've done the presentation, we would like to spend a few minutes doing some questions. So I'm just checking the time. I think we have a little bit over 15 minutes here. So if you have any questions, feel free to share them with me. And I'm just going to try and view the questions over here that have been shared. So okay, so I just want to see what some of the questions that we have. So my first question to Liz will be, what surprised you most about the findings as you were doing this research?
Thanks, Elodie. I think what not most surprising, but I think what really was very enriching out of this was the whole unpacking of the counseling versus coaching kind of dynamic. We had sort of heard these different terms used, but really didn't fully understand the difference in philosophies that underpin them, the range of practices, and why and when people were choosing to use different approaches. So I think this study has been incredibly useful to us in terms of helping us to better understand the range of modalities of financial counseling and when the use of different modalities and approaches are appropriate, and understanding the real differences in financial needs and priorities of clients at different stages along the path of financial security. So that alone, I think, was worth the price of the study in terms of the learning that generated. So it was a great discovery for us. I mean, it may have been apparent to some of you practitioners in the field already, but for us it was a great learning.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz. And I'm reading people's questions as well, and I noticed there's a few questions about getting access to our slides, and I wanted to let you know right after you'll be receiving the slides, so apologies for not letting you know of that earlier. And then there's a few, I'm just reading out some of the other questions. In terms of our statistics, we'll share more information with you later as well, so you'll have all the data that was shared in the presentation, so you can see it. somebody asked me about plans to work in specific communities, in their own communities. And one that was mentioned was Vancouver. So I think the answer to that question would be that we're definitely interested in partnering with organizations throughout Canada. And if you have a particular interest that you know of and you'd like to contact us, I think would be really happy and excited to hear from you. So feel free to do that. Um, when we talk about supporting community organizations to roll out and test financial coaching and counseling, so like I mentioned, we're going to be working on a few specific projects that we've identified, and then we are always interested in and hopeful to support as many community organizations as we can across the country. So again, if that's an interest that you have within your community, you can reach out to us. As you know, or maybe you're not aware, we're a fairly small team, so we won't be able to meet the needs of everybody, but we would be really happy to have a conversation with you, understand what your needs are, and what you're looking to do, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, if I could just build on what Elodie was saying. I mean, we're a nonprofit like all of you, or many of you. So we have to secure funding for any project that we undertake, but we're always willing to work with partners in the field across the country to go out and seek funding for something that we want to do together. But over time, our goal is really to, through these individual pilot and demonstration projects, to actually build up the tools, resources, and knowledge that we can share freely with everybody in the field through our website, through webinars, through other knowledge exchange activities, so that we can really reduce barriers to entry for organizations that want to start providing this service. And also at the same time, we'll be working with policymakers and governments and other institutions to look at how we can get this built into their policy and program funding frameworks so that more resources are available to groups in the field that really want to undertake this work.
Great, thank you. Thank you for adding that, Liz. One question that came up as well, and I'd like you to answer, Liz, if possible, was around who we interviewed, and were they more from the non-for-profit sector, or what was their background? If you can maybe tell us a little bit more about that, that would be great.
That's great, and we'll also be sharing the full report with you, and there's a whole section in there that goes into great detail about who we spoke to, and actually there's a list of all the key informants. But I can say that we did talk to 21 key informants over the course of the study. 19 of them participated in the 1-hour full interview. Of these, 15 key informants were drawn from organizations or programs that actually deliver frontline individual financial counseling or coaching support to low-income clients. And the key informants were usually program managers with direct involvement in frontline counseling. We also talked to 4 key informants from intermediary organizations. So these were drawn from practitioner networks and associations of organizations that provide financial counseling. And really they were helping to share their knowledge of collective efforts to build standards for quality control, risk management, program replication, and efforts to scale up programs. And finally, we spoke with 2 academics who've conducted research on financial counseling programs for low-income people who shared their evidence findings with us. So in a nutshell, that's who we talked to. And if we look at the breakdown, there were 3 participants from Australia, 6 from Canada, 1 from the UK, and I think 11 from the United States. And that reflects the fact that financial counseling is a much more widespread phenomenon in the United States, and they have scaled up programs delivered in a number of cities as well as national organization that supports knowledge exchange and technical assistance in this area.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz. This next question I'm going to ask Anna to answer. There's a question about how motivational interviewing is used in this area of financial counseling and financial coaching. So can you just maybe explain what it is and how it's being used in the interventions?
Yes, that's a great question. Financial coaching is actually informed by different theories and practices and principles. So motivational interviewing is one of them, in which it's all the sessions and the relationship with the clients is established and guided through questions that not only challenge the clients but also make them reflect. And every single step of the way, it's prompting the clients to reflect not only on the past but on the options that they have looking into the future. And it's proven to really help the clients find the resources but also the strength in themselves to come up with solutions of their own.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. I noticed there's quite a few questions on funding, which is always an area that's a big question that we hear about. So maybe, Liz, you could talk a little bit about, what funding plans might be or might there not be. And then somebody asked about the TD Grant Fund, so maybe if you can also clarify that. Thank you.
So I'll start with the TD Grant Fund. This was a grant fund that was endowed by the TD Bank Group, and that we administered at Prosper Canada to support community financial literacy education. Unfortunately, we have granted out the last of the money. It's all been allocated, so that fund is actually sunsetting this year. So there won't be any further granting opportunities under the fund, so we're sorry, but unfortunately it's come to the end of its life. In terms of broader funding for financial counseling, really, in terms of the projects that we're doing, we've been seeking funding from a combination of foundations, corporate partners that are interested in supporting this work. We have a grant from the Ontario Trillium Foundation, which now has announced, actually, for practitioners that are in Ontario, has announced a new granting focus, and one stream of that is around prosperous people. So it really lends itself to projects of this type. So we've been able to secure some funding to work with First Nations groups specifically in this area, financial empowerment, including financial counseling. So that's one potential source that people might look to in Ontario. I think financial institutions are very interested in this work, and they understand the need for it. So that's another potential source. Over time, though, as I mentioned, really ideally what we'd like to see is more integration of this approach into other government policy and program funding frameworks, because it really does play a direct and tangible, measurable role in reducing poverty and preventing poverty. It can also help strengthen outcomes when you integrate financial counseling into programs like housing programs, employment programs. We've seen that there are very measurable improvements in outcomes in those programs. There's lots of research from the United States on that. And we'll provide some links on our website to the reports that have some of the evidence around that people may find useful. We also know that it can have a big impact on mental health. Financial stress can cause mental health issues, so alleviating that stress. And we're doing work also looking at how we can integrate some financial empowerment approaches more broadly into actual frontline healthcare delivery. So, so those are some areas we're exploring where there may be avenues to build in this work into these broader frameworks and programs so that funding under these types of programs and policy approaches can be made available for financial counseling work. But it's a longer-term goal.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Liz. So another question that was asked about, this will be probably our last question that we answer, and then we'll have a few closing remarks. I noticed a few people, first of all, asked about how to get in touch with us. So our last slide will have all of our contact information with our emails, but you can also go on our website under the Contact Us section. All of our individual emails and information is there if you'd like to email us or call us. So maybe one final question that was asked here was about how did organizations measure the behavior change that was happening in their clients? And I'm wondering if that's one that Anna can help us with, or at least get us started. So the question again was, how did organizations measure the behavior change that was happening in their clients? So what were the key outcomes that they were looking at?
My experience in the U.S., they've worked for several years in developing a evaluation framework with key indicators and milestones that would tell the improved behavioral changes. And some of those key indicators include setting goals such as creating a budget, um, reducing expenses, reduce debt, and some of them have actually taken a step forward into what makes a significant percentage of debt reduction. The same with changes in credit scores. So it's through a set of quantitative economic outcomes and changes in those that they've been able to prove whether these strategies, being counseling or coaching, make a difference in people's lives.
I just want to add to what Anna was saying, that in some of the, particularly in the coaching methodologies also, they're looking at changes in confidence of participants in the programs, their ability to self-advocate on financial matters, their growing sense of efficacy on their financial decision-making, and also just I think a number of groups actually look at participant attitudes around their level of stress around their financial lives as well, and whether that's been reduced. So there are qualitative measures as well around attitudes, confidence levels, and stuff that are also very important, I think, particularly when you're focusing on the longer-term empowerment and capability building.
Great. Thank you so much both Liz and Anna for answering some of those questions. I'm really sorry if we didn't get to answering your question. There was quite a bit that came through. But thank you, first of all, to everyone for joining us. This was our first webinar, so we learned quite a bit from it. Sorry, we're having some issues. Okay. So I just wanted to, thank everyone for joining us. Let you know that we will be sending you an email shortly. And this email is going to have a few things in it. One is going to have the link to the report and the executive summary. So I know some people, for example, asked about a list of the key informants that we interviewed. So that will be in there, and you'll see a lot of those details in there that you've been asking about. We'll also share a copy of this presentation. And finally, we'll include a really short survey about the webinar. It's our first webinar, so we'd love to hear from you, things you think we should do differently, things that went well or didn't go well. We're very aware that technology issues happened at the beginning, and we apologize again for that, but thanks for being patient. We'll include in the survey a question about your interest in staying informed on this work, specifically around financial counseling and financial coaching. So let us know, and then we'll add you to that list so we keep you up to date. And then not right away, but we will also be posting our recorded webinar online, so that if anybody would like to listen to it or share it with anybody else, let us know. Liz is going to add one thing.
For those of you who are a little more policy inclined or like to read all the lengthy papers, we've also included in the report a bibliography of references, so you can look at the published literature. We did ask key informants to identify any important research resources or papers on this, so we've included a bibliography as well. So for people who want to do more reading, that'll be available in the report.
Great, thank you. The final thing I wanted to share is ABLE 2015 conference. So November 2nd and 3rd of this year will be I believe it's the 4th ABLE conference that we'll be hosting here in Toronto. And we would love to have many of you attend if you're interested. We don't know the agenda yet, but we definitely know that financial counseling and coaching will be a topic that will be talked about there. And we're hoping to have around 300 people, stakeholders from across the country that are really experts and practitioners in financial empowerment, including our national financial literacy, Jane Rooney. So we'd love to have you guys attend, and you can find out more information on our website as well. So I think this is the end of our webinar. Thank you so much again, everyone, for joining us. And on the last slide that you can see here, you have our contact information if you'd like to get in touch with us. Thanks, and have a great day.